Hi everyone, my name is Ngozi Bell.
My name is Robert Opara.
And I'm excited to be part of this new programming that is called the Urban and Business Trends in Africa. UBTA will be featuring stories from all around this great continent. We'll talk about the issues, we'll talk about the opportunities, we'll talk about the trends, we'll talk about the successes, we'll talk about the failures too. We'll talk to the youth, we'll talk to women, we'll talk to industry leaders, we'll talk to government officials and everyone in between.
We're going to be looking at issues of business in Africa. We're going to be looking at investments that are coming into the African region.
UBTA will be concerned about the disenfranchised and the enfranchised. We'll talk to the global leaders who have done amazing things outside and learn from them on how they can do the same things within the continent.
Looking into the Africa that we know and the Africa that we also don't know.
So join us in February as we launch this amazing program, UBTA, coming to a TV station near you.
Welcome to UBTA Television Live,
where the conversations are about you and I.
Very welcome back to this unique program package. And of course, Ngozi is at the other end of, in the US. And of course, two of our colleagues are also waiting in the wings. We are going to bring them on board now to look at technological issues and what has tech or technology got to do with all the stuff that we're talking about here. So let me bring on Okezue and of course Moses. You guys are very, very welcome. Moses, I'm glad you're able to make it today. Thank God for you. And of course, Okezue, that's a huge thumbs up for all the 5 a.m.s and 4 a.m.s that you guys have been doing this and all that. But I'm sure we will hit the right nerve in quite soon. Then let's look at technology. We are driving the issues of human resource management, human capital. The question is that what has technology got to do with this?
Thank you, Ngozi. Welcome to this segment of UBTA. My name is Moses Assam, and as Robert mentioned, I'll be joined by my co-host, a very brilliant young man, Okezue Bell. In this segment of the show, we'll cover technology and science. In this case, we're going to be focusing on technology and science that would improve human capital. So, Okezue, we have lots of work to do, as the definition of human capital is fairly simple. Let me start from something that is very basic. This is the knowledge, skills, health that people invest in to allow us to create or produce super productive lives. That's the end. That's what human capital is. We have a continent of over 1 billion people. And in order for this continent to be very successful, we have to tap into the human capital. The good thing is that technology has improved greatly, and technology can help us enhance human capital. So we'll be covering things like communication skills, education, technology skills, experience, and just problem solving, as well as things as important as mental health. All of this will explore the impact of technology in providing this enhancement in human capital. So, Okezue, let's kind of talk through some of the emerging technologies that we think are going to affect human capital on the continent.
Yeah, well, first, I think one of the really important things to note is that the World Economic Forum's Human Capital Index actually finds that in sub-Saharan Africa, only 55% of human capital across the region is actually being utilized. So we clearly see an underutilization of the labor force across sub-Saharan Africa and in Nigeria specifically, and it's actually over 10% lower than the global average of 65%. So not only is Africa's workforce being underutilized, but when compared to the global average, we're actually seeing that it's a significant margin lower. And that's definitely telling of the overall structure of the industries across sub-Saharan Africa and the underutilization of skills, technology, and capabilities of the people living there. And so with the advent of technology, specifically in the fourth industrial revolution, it's not only important that we engage more individuals into the workforce and the labor force as a whole, but that we also start to re-educate technical workers to adapt to these ever-developing fields, particularly in the service sector, agricultural, manufacturing sectors as well, because these are the three sectors that will be most impacted by 4IR, the fourth industrial revolution. Within the service sector, demand grows with income. And so with the new opportunities that are abounding over time, it becomes really, really important that we have educated job seekers who they can work in formal firms or help with employment domination. And then in the agricultural sector, we need to see productivity gains in farm earnings and in reduction of rural poverty. And so one of the biggest things we'll need to be doing is educating local farmers, growers, and also agricultural businesses on utilizing new technologies like vertical farming and scaling, which we talked about last time, in their production and supply chains. And then, of course, in the manufacturing sector, this means that we need more technical education, both across engineering and technology use, as well as information infrastructure and information technology. So those are going to be the three aspects of the workforce that are going to prove most important in Africa. And it becomes imperative that more and more people are being well educated. Again, the World Economic Forum actually cites that education is set to increase from 36% to 52%. So it's supposed to be 52% in 2030. And that means 20 million increasingly well-educated young people are actually expected to join the African workforce annually. So it's also showing the importance of youth and in education at an early age, something I've been a proponent of for quite some time. And so with these developments and with the next generation sort of going to being taken over the workforce, it's important that we're preparing them to enter into the fourth industrial revolution effectively.
Awesome. Those are extremely important points. Let's talk a little bit about education, because we know that with the fourth industrial revolution, with internet and communication, and we have now the ability to educate more people than ever, right? Today we're having Zoom calls everywhere. And so there are new tools that are coming to the marketplace that will allow us to increase these skills, and either from technology, from science, from nutrition, healthcare. All of this can be impacted by technology today, right? I could have one teacher is able to cover, hundreds of students in different disciplines, different skills. How do you see this playing around? What technology do we have to deploy on the continent that will allow us to enhance this human capital development?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest things that we're seeing is that, first off, unfortunately, of all regions, sub-Saharan Africa actually has the highest rates of education exclusion. So from children of ages 6 to 11, over 1/5 of them are out of school, and 1/3 of adolescents, so ages 12 to 14, are not in school. And so a large disconnect we're seeing here is between the actual educational outcomes for these students and then the opportunities that they're presented with. We see a discontinuity sort of between those two aspects of education, which is very unfortunate, especially in the sub-Saharan Africa region, which has so much mind and human potential. But what's interesting in the developments we're actually seeing is that now with the web and new forms of digital education, we can see these education rates significantly increase, which I think is something so powerful. And so we all know about technology and tools like ChatGPT that have been coming out that essentially present us with an entirely new digital infrastructure and human to computer interaction modality that is really, really powerful. ChatGPT is adaptive, it's accessible, it's easy to use, it's highly functional. and it sourced all of these information from 2021, meaning that it could actually run solely off the cloud without even requiring access to internet or Google search. And what's really interesting is that, people say, oh, these countries are, these third world countries, they're impoverished, they don't have access to this or that. But what's interesting is that even in the poorest countries in the world, people are more likely to have access to a smartphone than a toilet. So it's clear that digital education will be the solution for undereducated populations, especially for youth who have more access to technology than they do even basic services or utilities. And so things like ChatGPT will be instrumental in being implemented in our educational infrastructure, because it not only makes it autonomous, but it also means that users will be able to learn at their own self-paced rate. I've even been able to develop applications using GPT technology that curates courses solely from crowdsourced information, and it does so in a logical and distilled manner so that people can learn it. I've been able to deploy this app locally at my school and have people try it. I have demos all over the internet posted on my YouTube channel, which anyone can feel free to check out. And so it's technologies like these that, once they're scaled and once they're implemented properly on ground, we'll see changes happening from the local level, and grassroots initiatives can help to foster this, ministries of education, and it will be profitable, and we'll see occupational outcomes change as well.
Awesome.
Moses,
yes.
Moses, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Let's look at it from this angle. You want to come back to Nigeria, for instance, and you want to set up a business, either a factory or industry or a consulting process or whatever. And so when you are looking at drawing up your human resources, what are you going to be looking at as someone that is part of the diaspora project in the US or in Canada or London or whatever? What will be your most issues that will be agitating your mindset? How are you going to go? And what sort of resources are you going to put on the table to be able to deploy the intellectual resources of Nigerians that are home-based to do this? Because why I'm asking this question, a lot of Nigerians are in the UK, in the US, in Australia, wherever they are. Their issues right now is that how would they come back and invest in Nigeria? And what level of resources are they going to look out for in order to be able to say, okay, I'm going to run this business in the next 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, and let's see how it goes. Can you give us an analogy of what dilemma someone that is living in the US will face when they come home at that Mohammed Airport?
Yeah, thanks, Robert. That's a very interesting and loaded question, actually. The beauty of the new world today, as we are today, is that we can communicate almost anywhere, right? Here we are having a discussion between Texas and Pennsylvania and Abuja, right? So we're able to do this. So technology has made this possible. Some of the existing problems today are obvious. If you don't have infrastructure, which in this case we're talking about power, water, or just simple basic infrastructure, internet, broadband communication, those have to be reliable in order for you to start, especially some of these emerging businesses. Right? We can say anything we want. If you don't have that basic infrastructure in place, it is very difficult to launch successful businesses. And this is something that we have to do. Now you have the onset of microgrids and solar power, renewable energies. All of these things are going to play a very important role in providing that stability in infrastructure that makes deployment of companies on the continent. Right. So this is something that we can both do. Again, technology comes to the rescue. The cost of solar power is decreasing significantly. That means that you can now deploy microgrids on the continent or in villages or areas where you could not have done before. The next set of challenges around battery technology. So when you capture all of this energy during the day, how do you store it so that you can reuse it, right? These are the kind of things that when you are trying to think of starting a business on the ground, You have to take this into consideration. And that is the role of both the private sector and the public sector. So the infrastructure has to be in place. If not, it's not going to work. And of course, you have to be there, right? You can get a workforce, you can get people in place, but if you are not there, the chances of the business being successful is really limited. You got to watch it. So there are lots of things that we can do as entrepreneurs to be able to establish entities on the continent, and lots of people are doing that, right? That's where growth is. You have 1 billion people that can be utilized. And so we're going to continue to see improvements. We talk about the human capital index. This is all tied to the most part, fundamental education, healthcare, right? Taking advantage of half or more of the population, which are girls, that need to be educated for us to capture that human capital. So there's a lot of things. You had a loaded question. I have broad answers. At the end of the day, you have to be there to make a difference, and you can be there either virtually as we are today or in person. Either way, there has to be a strong partnership between the public and private sectors in order to deploy this 55-60% gap that Okezu mentioned, right? When a child is born in Africa today, the youth, by the time they die, of course, this is improving. In the 60s, lifespan in Africa was 40-something years. Today, it's about 62, 63 years. So though we're making some improvements, but we still have a huge gap to be able to fully utilize our youth. So we need to take advantage of that. We have lots of work to do, but with forums like this, we hope to be able to start moving in the direction through education, through healthcare, through nutrition, through taking advantage of, educating women and girls. All of this will allow us to improve human capital on the continent.
Ngozi, can you drive this thing from the foreign direct investment perspective, from what Moses have just enumerated? So many Nigerians are involved in dragging investment from the diaspora down to Nigeria, down to Africa, down to Guinea, down to Ghana, down to Ivory Coast and Tanzania and all that stuff. And most of them, successful. Most of them are not so successful and all that. So what's the difference between a real capital hedge process and theoretical process that people just jump into the aircraft, come back to Nigeria, develop a concept, fund it, and pop off, just like my brother Moses said. For me as a person, for me with an experience from doing these kind of things without proper value system being analyzed and all that stuff, what's the difference between success and failure when Nigerians living abroad are coming home to say, I want to invest? I'm asking you because you're obviously an expert in all this, and of course, Moses is an expert, and Okezu is an expert. From this perspective, how do we go?
Robert, that's a very good question with respect to FDI and investments into the continent. I think we can take a sort of a back step and look at countries who are able to come into the continent of Africa and succeed, right? China is doing it, India is doing it. A lot of European countries are coming in as entities, and they're bringing in their resources, they're bringing in training capabilities, they're bringing in institutionalized ways of engagement. They're creating modules that are allowing entrepreneurs to go from step to step in terms of the process by which they engage in the game of entrepreneurship. It's the same thing. So I think where there's a will, there's a way. Diaspora has done a lot in terms of bringing capital into the continent. So have institutional investors. Just a few years ago, about 10 billion US dollars came into the continent within a very short span. fueling a lot of fintech enterprises as well as agrotech enterprises. So I don't think the issue is about finances being able to find their way into the continent. It's really about building the enabling environment. That's what people are looking for. It's like a yin and a yang. So the money can come in, the expertise comes in. A lot of Africans, both internally and outside the borders, are experienced and brilliant. Many of them are inventors. Many of them have come up with ideas that can be commercialized. The thing is, creating that environment that allows those ideas to not just percolate and germinate, but for them to thrive, requires what we all call the enabling environment, which means the regulatory environment, the policy environment, the ability to access funds. Right now, there are countries where Nigeria, for example, where just having access to capital is an issue. So if you started a company and you need to be able to pay your workers, you need to be able to buy tools and all that, and you don't have access to that capital on demand, that becomes an issue. So I think, just from what we've heard from Moses and also with Okes, we're looking at ways that technology can facilitate a lot of things and removing the barriers so that the distance between access and performance becomes shorter is the key. And I think why I enjoyed their conversation so much is that we've seen that in the past. In the telecom space, when we looked at going over air, that was when Africa stood up and became a huge participant in technology acquisition and technology utilization. If they needed to dig, trenches to put cables, that would have been completely cost prohibitive. But the minute the technology advanced over the air, Africa emerged. The same thing is going to happen in this sector. And I think what Okezwe and Moses were talking about is so key to that. So I think the money will come, the money is there. It's creating that enabling environment to ensure that people can take their products, their ideas, they can go from ideation to commercialization. That's what is key. And our young people are doing it, by the way. And I think perhaps one of the things we can do is to maybe dovetail a little bit, Moses, you guys were talking about technology, from a young person's perspective and the ability to acquire technology from everywhere. What makes Africans stand out? They have this ability to do beyond the capacity, beyond the access. What makes them stand out? I'll give the conversation back to you guys.
Yeah. So look, you guys had mentioned this before, right? You have a very youthful continent. I mean, what age in your life do you absorb the most knowledge? As a youth. Right. So we have the capacity to leapfrog in each of these segments. Now, we have to be able to provide the building block, that building block, and that is education, making sure you have qualified teachers. You have to train the teachers. You have to get more girls into schools. You have to establish trades and specialization, right? So these are the basic building blocks, and you have to have. We talked about nutrition. This is important. If you don't have good health care, you can't do anything, right? So there are lots of effort to eliminate some of the diseases like malaria, diarrhea, these common things that affect most of the population. We have to be able to tackle those. But again, the slope is positive. You have a tremendous youth base. And in my opinion, the only way to go is up, right? If you look at people like Okezwe, they have tons of Okezwes on the continent. How do you reach them? If you give an analogy in soccer, right? We used to have all these academies. You're able to pick up the JJ Okochas of the world. We should be able to pick up the next Okezwes of the world on the continent.
Okezwe, how do we pick up the Okezwes on the continent?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing is sort of going into areas like Tanzania, like Nigeria, like South Africa, like Kenya, where a lot of the already skilled workforces are concentrated, and sort of focusing efforts on ensuring that they're properly integrated into the fields that, again, are lending themselves to the fourth industrial revolution. From creative industries like food technologists to 3D designers to data center workers in care, education and health workers, it's really important that we see cross-industry collaboration at early ages, and also the implementation of more technical education for youth. I think when you're challenging youth to go into these larger and more expansive and intersectional fields, or at least understand the basics of them, that's how you really draw out knowledge and skills. And so I think that when we're seeing these like ICT intensive jobs across the region, it's important that we're starting to prepare a pipeline and accelerating the acquisition of digital and STEM skills, so that we can ensure that the next generation will understand this new wave of occupations and really know how to be able to work within the context of the fourth industrial revolution and beyond. And so I think weeding out young talent is a product of a strong education that prepares students and youth, not only occupationally, but also from a critical thinking and skills perspective.
Okay, guys, maybe you guys can take 2 minutes each and analyze actually the security implications of investment in Africa. Because if you look at it, for instance, in Nigeria, everybody's shouting about bring back projects, come and invest and come and do this, but our police is suspect. The security angle of dealing with issues in Nigeria is also suspect. So how do we go around it in Africa where we can't manage our own security and we're having issues with security? And now that Nigerians are having an election, you don't even know who is talking. You don't know who is in charge of security. People are dying every day. And it's not just, peculiar to Nigeria alone. In Africa, investment comes in, yes, just like everybody agrees. But at the end of the day, at what level? These investments, are they secured? Do we have, proper parameters to look at the level of security in Nigeria? For now, let's look at what is going on in Africa, in Nigeria and all that. The continent is not safe. That's the bottom line. If you go into a hotel in Addis Ababa or in Lagos and all that, you have to watch your back 24/7. Whether you have CCTV camera or not. Americans say shit happens. I'm sorry I'm using that language. So at the end of the day, we will need to take care of our own security apparatus. Otherwise, whatever investment that Nigerians that are living in diaspora are attracting into the continent will go to zero, because at the end of the day, those people they are dragging into the continent to come and invest will say, wait a minute, what are we doing here? So let's look at it from a practical perspective. You guys are there. And so what do you suggest that we should do regarding security issues? Otherwise, all the good talk that we are doing on television and all that stuff, it's not going to wash.
Yeah, I'll be happy to take that real quick, and I think we have to get back on topic, right? Today we're talking workforce development, but you make a good point that security is crucially important to the stability of any nation, and specifically to African nations, because that stigma and that expectation has been the narrative for so long, and certainly a narrative that must be fixed and must be tackled wholesale and quickly. And no one is going to invest in an area that feels insecure, right? Investors have to feel like when they're coming in, that's part of what we're talking about in terms of having an enabling environment. Security is absolutely the number one. Nobody wants to be kidnapped when they come in. But I think that, that's a topic that we have to go into proper detail, and we have another program for that. And something we don't want to, yes, we're teasing it out a little bit here, but we certainly don't want to sell our viewers short So I think we'll finish the workforce that we were talking about, and the next time when we talk about the security show, we'll go into the details because we have a lot to talk about there. We don't want to. We'll be here till tomorrow, right? If we start that conversation. So I think perhaps one of the things that we can, as we wrap up this show, is you guys were talking about tech and the importance of tech to workforce development. So are there some specific technologies that Africa is rendering today that gives it an edge, right? And if Africa honed in on those technologies, we will come out on top. Can you speak to some of those?
Yes. So, okay, so I'll take it and then you can add to it. Look, we talk about communication, how the smartphone and other devices have changed. We talked about how we leapfrog some of the people that were putting fibers and cables underneath. The same thing has happened in the fintech area, where we saw the emergence of M-Pesa kind of change the equation in Kenya, right? And so you have lots of fintech. We have some areas around super apps. I have a friend of mine, Dr. Briggs, out of Kenya now, that is developing a super app similar to what WeChat does in China. So you started seeing this. The next area, I have mentioned this before, we don't have to have a huge generator of electricity to service from Abuja to Kano or from Lagos to Kano. You can have microgrids that are able to be self-sufficient. So this decentralization of power is an example of where Africa can actually lead. We'll talk about communication, we'll talk about internet, which is a good part of that, providing broadband, wireless broadband. We talk, and again, infrastructure is important. We talked about electricity. We can do the same thing with water as well, right? So all of the fundamental things that are required to build a stable infrastructure can be leapfrogged. We don't have to go back and do what the West did hundreds of years ago. So you can do the same thing on the medical side. We're talking about telemedicine as a good example. But I don't have to have zillions of hospitals, right? You can be able to communicate and come to patients and provide those services without going back to build zillions of hospitals. Of course, we don't have adequate at this point. But this is just some example of few things that can be done, can be leapfrogged from what the West did. Remember, we're not building a way anymore. Right? We're starting from a different baseline. So those are some of the things, and occasionally if you have some examples of similar things as well.
Yeah, so okay, so wait, how can we get the 378 million people employed in 2030? That's the question.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ways, again, it just stems back to education and proper preparation of workforce, but also more workforce compatible policies across government, which encourage constructive public and private dialogue for urgent and fundamental reform of both our educational and occupational pipelines. I think if we have a sort of future skills initiative, we'll see a lot better occupational outcomes, both for students, but also more employment across businesses. But then I think the final facet is really encouraging the globalization and industrialization of Africa. I think we're going through the fourth IR right now, but it's really important that we see businesses proliferate and we see a sharp decline in unemployment across Africa. Because I think with that, with more businesses, we'll have more available jobs for people to take up. And the more technology is implemented on ground, the more that people will realize the need to learn these new skills and to integrate themselves with a rapidly changing economy and sort of technological landscape. So I think to close with that, it's really important that we start formalizing these newly growing technological sectors. We see more developments and growth on ground, and we'll ultimately see more people sort of getting into these areas and it proliferating across Nigeria. I think that will be the most important thing. And sort of, it will start in Nigeria, but I guarantee it will spread to the rest of sub-Saharan Africa and the continent as a whole.
Yeah, let me just add one thing.
Sorry,
Just
guys.
quickly add one thing to that.
That was actually coming up with my question. Who will bail the cat in this whole process? Is anybody willing to have the political capital and political will to start up what my brother Moses talked about, from Ghana to Lagos to another? Do we have someone that has said, okay, let me take the bull by the horn and let's see how I can end up?
Yeah, Robert, look, this is about leadership, right? This is making sure that we have the right leadership. You can't do anything without the right leadership, right? We can rise up as individuals, but at the end of the day, you had takes a village to do anything, right? To raise a child. So this something applies here. You have to have a critical mass of people that want to do this, and I think most people do want to. I'm just going to add one more thing. One thing that we have to do going forward is sustainability. That has to be part and parcel of how we build our economies going forward, right? So that we don't destroy where we are. And we have enough knowledge now to be able to take advantage of all, again, back to technology, emerging technologies that allows us to not just destroy this only planet that we have, but keep it to future generations by going to sustainability programs. Again, by this infrastructure we talked about, do it in a sustainable way. And this is feasible. This is what 100, 200 years ago, the West could not do that. Africa should be able to do that. If we do that, we can lead the planet in the next 20, 30 years.
Absolutely. You heard it here.
Have we actually started a competition right here? Do you think that this can form the fulcrum of a national and international conversation that involves Africans on the way to go?
We almost have no choice, Robert, right? This is, again, we're trying to create a competitive advantage. Sustainability is where we are starting. So instead of exploiting the earth, we can use the natural. And Africa is best positioned to do that. I don't see any other continent that is in a better position to do that.
Absolutely.
Okay, we actually have few minutes to go. Rosie, can you wrap up?
Oh, absolutely. I just want to say, well, you heard it here on UBTA. We say if it's about Africa, it's about UBTA. Thank you, guys. This has been an amazing conversation. We look forward to the next one where we'll be talking about health. I know a lot of our touched a little bit about Africa's health, but that is so fundamental and so crucial to the success of the continent. So everyone, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to having you next time.